A black woman stands alone on the scorching tarmac at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Her arms are outstretched, her voice steady, her live stream climbing past 1 million views in real time. A Delta Boeing 787, preparing to land, is forced to abort its descent. Red warning lights pulse across the runway. Security teams surround her, weapons drawn. Behind her, a growing line of passengers, black, brown, white, arms linked in silent protest. This is not a movie. This is Celeste Morgan, 41 years old. A tech CEO with a Stanford MBA, a government contract worth $280 million waiting for her signature in San Francisco, and the resolve of a woman who has built everything she has from the ground up. 10 minutes earlier, she had been forcibly removed from her first-class seat. Not for breaking any law. Not for threatening anyone. Not for refusing to follow instructions. But for asking, calmly, for the same service given freely to every white passenger around her. And when she was ignored, mocked, burned by a spilled cup of coffee, and then accused of being disruptive, she didn't back down. What happened next shut down one of America's busiest airports for nearly 7 hours. What began as humiliation became headline news. What started with silence became a movement. And what seemed like just another example of quiet discrimination would lead to the resignation of a major airline CEO, a federal investigation, and the birth of something far bigger than any one person. Before we dive into the full story of how one woman stood alone and inspired thousands to follow, take a moment. Where are you watching from today? Tap like if you've ever witnessed injustice while traveling. Hit subscribe if you believe change begins when we say, enough. Now take a deep breath, because the story you're about to hear may just change the way you look at every gate, every terminal, and every flight you ever take. Let's rewind the clock to the moment Celeste Morgan boarded Delta Flight 2220, Seat 1A, and the system made its first mistake. It underestimated her. Celeste Morgan stepped onto Delta Flight 2220 with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place in every room she entered. Her black heels clicked softly against the cabin floor as she made her way to Seat 1A, first class, window. The flight attendant offered a tight smile, not quite warm, not quite rude. Just enough to feel like an asterisk. She tucked her laptop bag into the overhead compartment, adjusted her navy blazer, and settled into her seat. Her skin glowed against the soft lighting, her natural curls pulled back into a sleek bun. She was calm, collected, the picture of executive power in motion. And yet, almost immediately, the energy shifted. The older white man in 1B glanced sideways, double-took, then adjusted his posture, visibly uncomfortable. 2 rows behind, a woman leaned toward her partner and whispered, loud enough for Celeste to catch fragments. How did she even afford that seat? Did she win a sweepstakes or something? Celeste had heard it all before. She had been mistaken for a flight attendant, for someone lost, for someone in the wrong seat. But never, never once, for the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech firm whose company powered half the secure back-end infrastructure for federal agencies. She glanced at her watch. 8:07 a.m. The contract meeting in San Francisco was set for 4 p.m. Pacific. Plenty of time. Or so she thought. The murmurs died down when a man in a suit boarded and was greeted by name. He received champagne before he even buckled his seatbelt. Celeste waited, politely, for the same offer. None came. Instead, the flight attendant walked right past her, offering drinks to every white passenger in the row. A pattern was already forming. And she had seen this pattern before. Not always this blatant, but always the same message. You are visible, but you are not welcome. As Celeste glanced around the cabin, she knew she was being watched, measured, and judged. Not for her resume, not for her brilliance, but for her blackness. And that, she knew, was the real turbulence. Celeste waited. Not with impatience, not with entitlement, but with the quiet expectation of someone who had paid over $2,000 for a first-class seat and knew she had every right to the same courtesy as the passengers around her. She pressed the service button once, gently, when the flight attendant passed by again. The light above her seat blinked softly. "Excuse me, may I please have a glass of water?" The flight attendant, Karen, her name badge shining under the cabin lights, nodded with a tight smile. "I'll be right with you." Then she disappeared. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. During that time, Celeste watched as the man across from her in 1C was offered a second mimosa. A couple in 2A and 2B were handed warm towels and a choice between orange juice or champagne. Karen moved up and down the aisle, performing her duties with practiced ease, but always skipping Celeste's row like it was invisible. Celeste took a slow breath and tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Karen got distracted. Maybe there was some kind of pre-flight checklist she had to finish first. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. It wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. She raised her hand again, this time more directly. "Excuse me, I asked for water a while ago." Karen turned mid-stride, her smile now rigid. "Yes, ma'am. We are preparing for takeoff. Please be patient like everyone else." Everyone else, Celeste thought, had already been served. Everyone else wasn't being told to wait while the cabin settled. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. From 2 rows back, a man in a gray suit leaned forward. "The crew is doing the best they can," he said, his tone firm. "No need for attitude." Celeste blinked slowly. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't crossed any lines. She had asked, with full composure, for a glass of water. And somehow, that simple request had become a perceived offense. This was how it always began. Not with slurs or screams, but with cold smiles, with service denied, with the kind of silence that was loud in its intention. This was not about a drink. It was about presence. Her presence. A black woman in seat 1A, in a space some still believed she did not belong. And a silence around her? It wasn't a mistake. It was policy, hidden in plain sight. Celeste shifted in her seat, pressing her palms together to slow the rising pulse in her wrists. She was used to being underestimated, but what was unfolding around her felt calculated, controlled. Across the cabin, everything moved with efficiency. Drinks poured, seatbelts clicked, polite conversations murmured like background music. And yet, around her, a vacuum of recognition. As if she were wearing a cloak of invisibility stitched with threads of discomfort and bias. Then she heard it. From behind the small divider curtain near the galley, 2 voices, hushed, but not enough. "You see her sitting in 1A?" said one, light laughter in her tone. "They always act like they earned it. Like we don't know how they got up here." That's Karen, Celeste realized. The same flight attendant who had ignored her twice. The other voice chimed in, lower, sharper. "Delta's been trying to fill these seats for diversity optics. Doesn't mean I have to treat her like a queen." Both women laughed again. Celeste's breath caught, but her hand moved with precision. She slid her phone from her pocket, angled it discreetly just above the edge of her seat, and hit record. The voices came through clearly. These were not isolated comments. They were rehearsed, casual, spoken like truth, not prejudice. This wasn't about one bad apple. It was about a culture that allowed this rot to spread quietly, politely, beneath the surface. The recording lasted less than 30 seconds, but it captured everything. A moment of unveiled honesty, the kind you never get unless people forget you're listening. Celeste didn't flinch. She didn't stand or make a scene. She simply saved the recording, slipped the phone back into her lap, and sat taller in her seat. Because now she had something more powerful than anger. She had evidence. A small window into a system that smiled in public and sneered in private. One that held seminars about diversity in boardrooms but allowed silent policies to speak louder than any mission statement. This stain, this quiet, persistent exclusion, wasn't just on a flight manifest. It was on the fabric of the industry. And she was no longer guessing. Now, she knew. The drink cart returned. Celeste watched it roll past row 2 with practiced efficiency, each passenger greeted by name, each drink delivered with a smile. When it reached her row, Karen hesitated, just long enough to confirm that what was about to happen wasn't an accident. Celeste offered a calm expression, her voice composed. "Water, please." Karen gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes and poured from a silver carafe into a porcelain cup. Her hand moved forward, then tilted. The splash of hot liquid struck Celeste's thigh before she could react. The sting was immediate, seeping through her slacks, spreading heat that burned into her skin. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Karen said, in a tone that sounded more like performance than apology. She offered no napkin, no towel, no eye contact. Celeste flinched, startled more by the intent than the pain. "Can I get some napkins?" she asked. Karen was already serving the next passenger, her voice light, cheerful, as if nothing had happened. The heat intensified. Her leg pulsed with discomfort, her skin damp beneath fabric that now clung to her uncomfortably. She pressed the call button. Nothing. The man seated behind her, mid-50s, buttoned up, white, leaned forward with concern. But it wasn't for her. "Ma'am, you're making a scene," he said sharply. Celeste turned, slowly. Her voice stayed level. "A scene? You're overreacting," he added. "It was just a mistake. No need to be dramatic." And there it was. The moment every black woman recognized. Where your pain becomes your fault. Where your reaction is the problem, not the act itself. Celeste could feel the eyes around her now. The subtle shift in energy. The unspoken question, is she going to make this uncomfortable for us? And still, no one moved. No napkins. No water. No acknowledgement of what had just happened. The silence wasn't just deafening, it was complicit. She stood, slowly, pressing the damp fabric away from her skin. That's when a man in plain clothes approached her. "Ma'am, I'm Air Marshal Rick Dalton. I need you to return to your seat. I'm trying to get assistance." "I was burned," Celeste explained. "We've received a report of disruptive behavior," he replied flatly. Celeste blinked. That's when she knew. The game was already in motion. The roles had been assigned. And her part, whether she liked it or not, was about to be rewritten. Celeste didn't resist. Not because she agreed, but because she understood the playbook. Any resistance, verbal or otherwise, would become ammunition. Another box checked in the narrative, already forming around her. As she gathered her purse and coat, the cabin seemed to hold its collective breath. No one asked if she was okay. No one asked what really happened. The man in 1C looked down at his tablet. The couple in 2A leaned away slightly, as if her presence carried contamination. And Karen, the flight attendant who had spilled the coffee, watched with faint satisfaction on her face, arms folded across her chest. Celeste took one last glance at the empty cup resting on her tray table, the brown liquid still pooling beneath it, the napkin she had never received still missing. Then she turned and followed Air Marshal Dalton toward the front of the plane. Halfway up the aisle, 2 uniformed airport security officers met them. One stepped forward, firm hand on her elbow. "Miss Morgan, we need you to come with us. There's a holding area in the terminal." "What's the charge?" she asked, her voice calm but direct. "You've been reported for aggressive and uncooperative behavior," said the taller officer, badge reading, read. Celeste blinked. For asking for water? For requesting napkins after being burned? The officer's face remained blank. "You can dispute that later. Let's go." Behind her, a few murmurs rose from passengers, but no voices loud enough to stand out. The same faces that had watched her enter the plane with side eyes now watched her leave with silent approval. As she stepped through the narrow doorway into the jet bridge, Celeste's professional identity evaporated. She was no longer a CEO. No longer a keynote speaker, a partner in one of the most important government tech contracts of the year. She was now a plebeian, a disturbance. Another black woman who must have done something to deserve it. Outside the aircraft, the cool terminal air hit her skin, but it couldn't soothe the sting. Not from the coffee, but from the humiliation. She turned slightly, catching a final glimpse of the cabin through the open door. And in that second, she saw what no one would say. They had expected her to disappear quietly. But Celeste Morgan had other plans. The holding room was sterile, windowless, and intentionally cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow that made everything feel sharper than it needed to be. Celeste sat on a metal chair bolted to the floor, her legs crossed neatly, posture upright, not out of comfort, but as a form of resistance. Two officers stood by the door, arms crossed, saying nothing. She had been stripped of her dignity in front of dozens of silent witnesses, labeled a problem for asking for the most basic human courtesy. But as the minutes ticked by in that frigid room, Celeste's humiliation began to harden into something else: clarity. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about a system that could erase your credentials, your resume, your humanity, with a single false report and a uniform to enforce it. Celeste reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her backup phone. The officers hadn't searched her thoroughly. They assumed she carried one device. A mistake. With precise hands, she unlocked the screen, opened her encrypted messaging app, and sent a single text. Angela. Delta. First class. Burned. Removed. Video coming. Go public. Angela Lawson was her chief of staff, a media strategist, and her closest friend. If anyone knew how to turn a moment into momentum, it was her. Seconds later, Angela replied, "I'm on it." Celeste selected the recording she had captured, the voices of the flight attendants mocking her, the moment the coffee spilled, the non-apology, the still image of her walking down the aisle with an officer gripping her elbow. She attached it to a post, typed 5 words, and hit send. #PowerOffPrejudice starts now. The hashtag was simple, bold, and clear. Within 5 minutes, the video hit 10,000 views. In 15, local journalists began to message Angela, asking for verification. In 30, civil rights attorneys began tagging the airline directly, demanding statements. Back inside the holding room, Celeste stared at the steel wall in front of her and took a breath that felt like fire and ice combined. She was no longer just a passenger. She was the tip of a spear. And the system that had tried to silence her was about to feel the weight of her voice, and the voices of thousands rising behind her. Celeste was escorted down a narrow corridor toward the back of the terminal. The officer walking beside her, the one with the nameplate that read "Read," never looked her in the eye. His grip on her arm was firm but not cruel, mechanical, as if this was just another box to check on a long list of assigned duties. When they reached a quieter section of the airport, he paused, glanced around, and leaned in. "There's a service closet 2 doors down," he said in a low voice. Knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. Celeste looked at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Go. Now. Before anyone sees me helping you." And just like that, he turned and walked back the way they came. Celeste hesitated for a beat. Then, with adrenaline sharpening every step, she made her way to the door. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 more. The door clicked open. A man in a faded maintenance uniform stood inside, mop in hand, eyes scanning the hallway behind her before ushering her in. His name tag read Wallace, but the look in his eyes spoke louder than his title. "You're the woman from the flight," he said. "We saw the video." He motioned behind him. Inside the cramped break room, 4 other employees were gathered, 2 baggage handlers, a janitor, and a woman in a TSA uniform with her jacket unzipped. Each of them looked like they had been waiting for this moment. "I'm Alicia," the TSA agent said. "We've been keeping track of this kind of thing for years. They think we're invisible. But we've been watching, recording, saving everything." Celeste blinked. "You've documented this?" Wallace nodded, pulling out a small black binder. Inside were printed emails, shift reports, incident logs, all unofficial, all meticulously gathered. Passenger profiles, code names, watch zones, by race. "It's real," Wallace said. "They just never thought someone would connect the dots publicly." Celeste felt something shift inside her. For the first time that day, she was no longer alone. "You want to fight this?" Alicia asked. Celeste nodded. "Then welcome to the other side of the terminal." Celeste stood in the middle of the dimly lit break room, surrounded by strangers who now felt more like allies than anyone she had known on that flight. "We've been waiting for someone like you," Wallace said. "Someone with visibility. With voice." Alicia pulled out her phone and opened a secure messaging app. "I've got 6 other employees on shift today. Security, maintenance, even one at the gate. They've seen what's happening. They're ready." "Ready for what?" Celeste asked. "For the story to go public. Not just yours, but the whole system," Alicia replied. "But we need coordination. We need evidence. And we need numbers." Celeste opened her spare device. The video she had uploaded was already over 80,000 views. Comments flooded in, stories from other Black travelers, screenshots of similar experiences, receipts from downgraded first-class tickets. A hashtag that had started as a whisper was turning into a roar. "We have momentum," she said. "Now we need to focus it." She turned to the group. "Here's what we do. Alicia, get those other employees documenting everything right now. Screen any internal messages, record any calls that mention me or the incident. Wallace, connect with your team in baggage. If there's a pattern of mishandling based on passenger names or ethnicities, we need those numbers." Celeste scrolled through her contacts and tapped a name. "Angela," she said into the phone. "It's happening. I need you to prep a press statement. Reach out to every major journalist we've worked with. Make sure they know this isn't just about me. It's about structural racism in airline protocols." Angela didn't hesitate. "Already ahead of you. We've got local news interested, and national outlets are circling." Celeste ended the call and looked back at the group. "We also need passengers. People still in the terminal. Anyone who was pulled aside for no reason, downgraded, searched twice." Alicia smiled. "I know just where to find them." Within minutes, the team dispersed like threads in a well-sewn net. Each knew where to go, who to speak to, what to record. Celeste stayed behind, breathing deep, steadying her nerves. This was no longer reaction. This was strategy. And strategy changes everything. The decision wasn't made out of impulse. It was born out of clarity. The kind that only comes when you've been stripped of every polite option and left with nothing but your voice and your body. Celeste stood in the staff corridor behind Terminal C, the service access door just ahead. Her badge, loaned from Wallace, blinked green against the scanner. Beyond that door was the tarmac. The air outside was thick with Texas heat, but her mind was sharp. Angela had just confirmed that #PowerOffPrejudice was trending nationwide, with over 250,000 shares in under 2 hours. Public support was exploding. Civil rights groups were backing the cause. News outlets were watching. But Celeste knew visibility wasn't enough. Not this time. The system would dismiss her unless it was forced to stop moving, just like that plane earlier, the one she was supposed to be on. She turned to Alicia, Wallace, and the half-dozen airport employees who had joined her. Then, without fanfare, she opened the door. The tarmac stretched like a concrete ocean beneath the noon sun. Engines hummed in the distance. Baggage carts buzzed along narrow lanes. Tower lights blinked above, oblivious to what was about to unfold below. Celeste walked forward, calm, deliberate, until she reached the edge of runway 16R. She raised her hand. "This is where we hold the line," she said. One by one, they followed. 55 people, linked arm in arm. Baggage handlers, off-duty TSA officers, gate agents, even a few passengers who had been watching from the terminal and decided to join. They didn't yell. They didn't carry signs. They simply stood, a human blockade against a system that had run unchecked for far too long. Inside the control tower, alarms sounded. Radios crackled. "We've got a group on the tarmac. Unauthorized. Approaching active runway. Runway 16 are now blocked. Alert FAA. Halt all landings. Overhead, a Delta 787 on final approach was forced to pull up, engines roaring back to full thrust as it aborted the landing. From inside the terminal, travelers pressed against windows. Phones came up. Live streams began. And just like that, the protest became a spectacle. And the spectacle became a message. You will see us. You will hear us. You will not ignore us anymore. The sun bore down like judgment. 92 degrees. No cloud cover. No shade. Just relentless Texas heat radiating off the endless concrete of the runway. Celeste stood at the front of the human chain, sweat dripping down her back, but her spine stayed straight. Her skin burned. Her throat was dry. But her voice? Unshaken. Across the tarmac, a helicopter touched down with the precision of a private arrival, not an emergency. A man stepped out. Mark Chambers, CEO of Delta Airlines. Pressed white shirt, loosened tie, dark sunglasses. He walked toward the protest line with a practiced air of concern, flanked by airport security and corporate staff. Celeste didn't move. She waited. When Chambers reached the perimeter of the blockade, he removed his sunglasses and addressed her directly. "Dr. Morgan, we'd like to resolve this peacefully." "Then listen," Celeste replied. "Because we're not moving until we know this is more than a PR cleanup." Chambers shifted his weight slightly, then nodded toward his assistant. She handed him a folder. "We're prepared to offer compensation. Public apology. Flight credits. First class status for." "Stop." Celeste's voice cut through the heat like a blade. "This isn't about perks. This isn't about me getting a better seat. It's about dismantling a pattern that has gone unchecked for years. It's about accountability, not optics." Behind her, Alicia stepped forward and held up a tablet, showing internal documents. Emails with coded language. Passenger profiling instructions. Data that proved this wasn't an isolated case. Chambers paled. "Where did you get those?" "The question is not where," Celeste said. "It's why they exist at all." A silence followed. A heavy one. The kind that only comes when truth has cornered power. "What do you want?" Chambers asked finally. Celeste took a slow breath. Acknowledgement. Immediate suspension of all profiling practices. A full independent audit of your service protocols. A permanent anti-discrimination policy, with teeth. And consequences for every manager who enforced bias in your ranks. Chambers looked toward the terminal, where hundreds of passengers watched from behind thick glass, phones still recording. "You have 5 minutes, Celeste added. Then we take this protest to your corporate headquarters. On live stream." He exhaled. "Then give me a pen." The pen hovered for a moment above the page, trembling slightly in the heat. Mark Chambers stood in silence, sweat gathering at his temples, eyes fixed on the document before him. Around him, the world had stopped spinning. Planes grounded, operations frozen, news cameras zoomed in. Celeste held her position, unwavering. She didn't blink. Didn't move. Behind her, the human chain remained locked, their arms limp from hours in the sun but their resolve harder than ever. "This isn't just a signature," Celeste said calmly. "This is your line in the sand. If you cross it with honesty, we'll step back. If not, the world keeps watching." Chambers signed. 3 strokes of a pen. One signature that marked the beginning of change. The agreement was short but powerful. A full independent audit of Delta's internal protocols, with third-party oversight. Immediate suspension of all racial profiling codes. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for all flight and ground staff. Creation of a passenger rights board with the power to investigate and enforce. And most important, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Chambers handed the signed document to Celeste. She reviewed it, her fingers steady, her eyes sharp. "It's not everything," she said. "But it's enough to break the cycle." He nodded, his face unreadable. The protest line began to relax. People released each other's arms, massaging shoulders, stretching limbs, wiping brows. But they didn't cheer. Not yet. Celeste turned to face the media, still live-streaming every second. We did not come here for favors. We came for truth. And today, truth stood its ground. She held the signed agreement in the air. This is proof that organized, peaceful resistance still works, even against giants. Inside the terminal, applause erupted. Not just from supporters, but from employees in uniform. Pilots, technicians, baggage handlers, TSA agents, and maybe, just maybe, some of the passengers who had once looked away. 6 months later, the runways looked the same, but the industry flying over them had changed. Celeste Morgan stepped off a jet bridge at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. Not as a passenger this time, but as a guest of honor. Her badge read, Keynote Speaker, Transportation Equity Summit. The protest had become policy. What started as a standoff on a sun-scorched runway had unfolded into the largest civil rights reckoning in aviation history. The signed agreement with Delta triggered a wave of reviews across every major airline. Public accountability became the standard, not the exception. And Celeste. She now served as senior advisor to the newly formed Office of Passenger Equity, a division created by executive order to investigate discrimination across all transportation sectors, air, rail, road. She walked through the terminal and noticed the subtle changes. Flight crew rosters now reflected the diversity of their passengers. Customer service representatives were trained to de-escalate without profiling. Complaint data, once buried in corporate silence, was now public and transparent. And perhaps most telling, a flight attendant paused as Celeste boarded her return flight home and said quietly, "Thank you. My job feels different now. Safer. More human." Celeste smiled. That was enough. She took her seat in first class. This time, no one blinked. No side glances. No tension. Just a passenger, treated with dignity, as every traveler should be. When the captain welcomed everyone aboard, he added a line Celeste had helped write into the new airline standards. "We are committed to treating every passenger with respect, regardless of race, gender, religion, or background. If you experience anything less, let us know. And we will make it right." The plane lifted into the sky, but Celeste's heart felt grounded. The movement had taken flight, and it wasn't coming down. Change rarely begins in boardrooms. It starts in uncomfortable moments. In burned thighs and bitter silence. In the ache of being overlooked and the choice not to shrink. For Celeste Morgan, the protest on that runway was never about going viral. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about a single airline. It was about the moment when enough becomes too much. It was about recognizing that silence can feel safe, but it never changes systems. That real progress requires friction, resistance, and the willingness to make people uncomfortable for the sake of something better. And it was about understanding this truth. When you've built your life on excellence, yet still have to defend your right to sit in seat 1A, the problem isn't you. It's the structure around you. That day on the tarmac, Celeste didn't just shut down a runway. She exposed a roadblock that has existed for generations, the kind that hides in smiles and soft apologies, in policy manuals and unchecked assumptions. But she also showed the power of standing together. Because when she stood alone, they called her disruptive. When others stood with her, they called it a revolution. That's the lesson. You don't need to be a CEO to demand respect. You don't need a viral video to speak the truth. You just need to refuse to accept invisibility, and know that your voice, when joined with others, becomes unstoppable. So here's our question for you. Have you ever witnessed injustice and stayed silent? Or have you ever spoken up, even when your voice shook? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey inspired you, hit the like button, subscribe for more true stories of courage, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded, their presence matters. Change begins the moment one person decides not to look away. Let that person be you.